Tonight, we imagine a present that never replaced the past, where Cleopatra's Egypt simply continued into the year 2026. Light rests along the stone edges of the river embankment, where water touches carved steps, the surface moving without urgency, carrying reed fragments and faint silt that softens the reflections of columns nearby. The air holds the smell of damp earth and sun-warmed limestone, and there is a quiet regularity in the way footsteps pass above, measured and unhurried, leaving dust patterns that shift slightly before settling again. Boats slide close to the bank with their oars lifted, nudged forward by poles, the wood darkened from use, the ropes looped neatly where hands know their place. Beyond the river, the land opens into fields drawn into long, deliberate lines, the soil turned and smoothed by repeated motions that require no announcement. Water is guided through channels cut low and wide, flowing just enough to reach roots without sound. Palms stand where they always stand, their shadows stretching thin across the ground as the day moves without calling attention to itself. Grain heads bend under their own weight, brushing one another with a dry whisper that fades as soon as it is heard. Stone buildings rise close together where the ground firms, their walls cool even when the sun is steady. Doorways remain open, allowing air to pass through shaded interiors where tables hold tablets of clay and papyrus rolls lie tied with fiber cords. Scribes sit with relaxed backs, adjusting their grip as lines are added and checked. The scratching sounds small and even. No one hurries them. Records are kept because they are kept. Numbers arranged in familiar groupings, marks pressed and lifted with the same pressure they have always required. Corridors lead inward, not grand but precise, their ceilings low enough to encourage a steady pace. Light enters from above through narrow openings, falling across reliefs worn smooth where fingers have traced them over time. In these passages, the sound of sandals softens, and voices lower without instruction. A presence lingers here, not as a figure but as an order of arrangement, an inherited alignment of space and purpose that does not need to be named. Courtyards open unexpectedly, holding pools where water sits still except when disturbed by a passing breeze or a cup lowered gently to the surface. The pools reflect fragments of sky and the undersides of leaves, broken briefly by ripples that spread and dissolve. Along the edges, stone benches are warmed unevenly, inviting rest without demanding it. People pause here to drink, to adjust a garment, to look without searching. From these spaces, learning continues in small, steady exchanges. Teachers speak in measured tones, not raising their voices, their words absorbed alongside the quiet movements of hands shaping wax or reed. Questions are asked and answered without emphasis, knowledge passing as a shared texture rather than a destination. Shelves hold instruments of measure and reference, their surfaces marked by use, their positions unchanged. Further in, ritual rooms maintain their calm order. Incense smoke drifts upward in thin strands, never thick enough to obscure the walls. Offerings are arranged with care that comes from repetition, bowls aligned, liquids poured to the same level each time. The scent settles into stone and fabric, becoming part of the air rather than standing apart from it. Silence here is not complete, but layered, made of breathing, fabric shifting, the faint sound of flame. Outside again, streets curve between buildings, narrowing and widening in response to foundations laid long ago. Vendors arrange goods on low platforms, baskets of figs, jars sealed with clay, folded linen stacked with edges aligned. Exchanges happen through gestures as much as words, weights balanced, hands meeting briefly. The ground bears the imprint of countless crossings, smoothed where carts pass, rougher where walls cast shade and moisture lingers. As the day holds, heat gathers and releases, moving across surfaces without drama. Animals rest where they find space, their presence accepted as part of the flow. A donkey lowers its head near a wall, ears flicking once, then still. Birds move between rooftops, their calls short, absorbed quickly by the open air. Administrative halls remain open, their thresholds worn shallow by time. Inside, officials sit at low desks, listening, nodding, marking decisions that align with established patterns. There is no sense of beginning or ending to this work. It continues because it is part of the shape of the place. Seals are pressed into soft material, lifted cleanly, set aside to dry. Toward the edges of the city, stone gives way to packed earth and grass. Wells are uncovered and covered again, the pulley wood polished by hands that know the weight of the bucket. Water is drawn and poured into jars, the sound hollow and brief. Children pass through these spaces, their movements light, weaving between tasks without interrupting them. As light softens, walls hold warmth longer than the ground, releasing it slowly. Shadows lengthen without announcement, stretching across thresholds and steps. Lamps are lit where needed, their flames small and steady, placed to serve rather than to display. The air cools just enough to be noticed, carrying the river's scent back through the streets. In upper rooms, windows remain open, cloths shifting slightly with the movement of air. Conversations continue at low volume, then pause, then resume, following no fixed pattern. Somewhere, a harp string is adjusted, plucked once, then left alone. Night settles not as an arrival but as a thinning of light, and the city rests within it, unchanged in its attentions, continuing in the same way it always has. Breath moves evenly in rooms where mats are unrolled and folded again, their fibers releasing a faint, dry scent as they bend. Water jars stand near walls, their surfaces cool to the touch, beads forming and slipping downward without being wiped away. In courtyards, stone retains the day's warmth beneath bare feet, a subtle contrast to the air that drifts across skin and cloth, settling into a balance that requires no adjustment. Along inner streets, the sound of sweeping passes once, twice, then stops, leaving a fine line of cleared dust that will soften again by morning. Doors close partway or remain open according to habit, not signal, their hinges moving with a muted ease. Lamps cast small pools of light that overlap slightly, enough to show the grain of wood or the edge of a step, not enough to draw the eye beyond what is needed. Near the river, water continues its low movement against stone, the rhythm unchanged by darkness. Reflections loosen and reform, responding to currents and passing clouds that thin and gather overhead. Reeds bend and straighten, brushing one another, their sound blending into the broader quiet. A hand reaches down to rinse a cup, lifting it again without pause, droplets falling back into the flow. Within enclosed spaces, shelves hold objects in careful arrangement, weights, seals, tools shaped to their task and no further. Fingers pass over them briefly, confirming their place, then withdraw. Wax tablets cool and harden where they were left, impressions preserved until they are no longer required. Nothing calls attention to itself, everything remains available. Paths between buildings feel narrower at night, not through change but through the way sound settles closer to the ground. Footsteps register softly, then fade, leaving only the texture of packed earth beneath. Above, the sky holds its depth without emphasis, stars present as points rather than patterns, their light touching surfaces without altering them. In spaces set aside for rest, fabric shifts with small movements, settling into folds that hold. The air carries traces of oil and smoke, faint enough to blend into stone and plaster. A breeze enters, moves across a room, and exits again, stirring nothing that needs to be stilled. The arrangement of walls, openings, and passages continues to guide it gently, as it always does. At the edges of cultivated land, irrigation channels reflect dim light, their surfaces broken only where insects skim and lift away. Earth cools gradually, releasing the day in increments too small to track. Plants hold their shape, leaves angled as they were, drawing moisture steadily without sound. From within the city, a low murmur persists, not speech but presence, the combined weight of settled activity. It does not rise or fall, it remains. Stones, water, air, and practiced motion continue to align, each maintaining its place, the whole resting without pause or completion. In narrower rooms, ceilings hold warmth close, and the air moves slowly along the contours of beams and corners, finding its way through without disturbance. Hands reach for familiar surfaces in the low light, locating cups, folded cloth, smooth stone edges by memory rather than sight. Sounds remain minimal, the soft contact of material against material, the brief exhale that accompanies a shift in position. Stone stairways cool unevenly, each step releasing heat at its own pace, the difference felt through thin soles and bare skin. Walls carry faint traces of past contact, their surfaces dulled where palms have rested, edges rounded through repeated passing. Nothing marks these details as notable. They persist because they are part of how movement has always been guided here. In open areas, the air settles closer to the ground, carrying the scent of soil and water together. A distant animal shifts its weight, the sound absorbed before it can travel far. Grasses at the margins bend slightly, responding to subtle changes in temperature rather than wind. The river continues its contact with the bank, steady and unremarked, the sound neither increasing nor diminishing. Within enclosed courtyards, shadows overlap, softening the outlines of columns and low walls. Light from lamps reaches only partway across stone, leaving surfaces beyond in gentle obscurity. A vessel is set down, adjusted by a small turn so its base sits flat, then left untouched. The arrangement holds without further attention. Above, rooftops release stored warmth upward, tiles cooling one by one. The sky remains open, its depth unchanged by observation. Below, the city's forms maintain their alignment, passages, rooms, and open spaces continuing to hold air, sound, and movement in quiet balance, without pause or requirement to move elsewhere. Where it is, a balance held through the steady distribution of weight and space. Air lingers beneath archways, neither still nor directed, brushing along stone faces and the undersides of lintels with a faint coolness that settles against skin. The surfaces of walls show variations only visible at close range. Small shifts in grain and mineral where blocks meet. Their joins softened by touch and time without becoming indistinct. A woven basket rests against one such wall, its rim slightly uneven, the fibers responding to humidity by tightening and relaxing in place. In passages that lead inward, the floor changes subtly underfoot, packed earth giving way to smoother stone, then back again. The transitions felt more than seen. A thin line of moisture traces one edge where cooler air gathers, darkening the surface without spreading. Someone pauses there, adjusts their step to avoid the damp, and continues without breaking rhythm. The sound of movement remains contained, absorbed by the surrounding structure, leaving the space much as it was before. Nearby, a low table holds a shallow bowl of water, its surface catching a small reflection from a lamp set higher up. The reflection trembles briefly as the air shifts, then steadies, the bowl remaining centered on its supports. A cloth draped beside it shows faint creases from folding, its edges softened, threads slightly raised where they have brushed against stone. No hand reaches for it yet. It remains available without anticipation. In an open area bordered by columns, the spacing between them allows the night air to pass through in measured intervals. The bases of the columns retain warmth, while their upper portions feel cooler to the touch, the difference marking height without drawing attention. Shadows gather at their edges, overlapping in ways that change subtly as lamps flicker and settle. The floor between them shows a pattern of wear that guides feet naturally along certain paths, not enforced, simply followed. Beyond this space, storage rooms remain closed but present, their doors fitted closely, wood meeting frame with familiar resistance. Inside, sacks of grain rest against one another, their weight distributed evenly, the contents settled and quiet. The smell of dried stalks and earth stays contained, seeping out only faintly through seams. The rooms do not announce themselves. They wait as they always do. Along the outer edges, where stone meets soil again, the ground holds the imprint of recent steps, alongside older marks that have blended into the surface. Small stones press into the earth at varied angles, catching light unevenly. A lizard crosses one such patch, its movement brief and precise. Then stillness returns, the ground unchanged in its overall texture. Above these areas, the arrangement of beams and roofing creates pockets of air that warm and cool at different rates. The underside of a roof feels dry, the material holding its shape without creak or shift. A faint settling sound passes through once, then does not repeat. The structure continues to support itself, distributing weight through patterns long established. Within rooms set apart for quiet activity, a figure sits with back against a wall, posture relaxed, eyes open or closed without emphasis. Nearby, a small container of oil remains capped, its surface reflecting a dim point of light. The scent is present but subdued, blending with stone and fabric rather than standing apart. Breathing aligns with the surrounding stillness, not as an act of intention, simply as part of the shared air. Outside again, the river's edge shows slight variations where water has receded or advanced by small degrees, leaving a darker band along the stone. The band dries slowly, its boundary irregular, marked by mineral residue that catches the light differently. A rope tied to a mooring post remains slack, its fibers rough beneath the hand, the post itself worn smooth at the height where knots are most often secured. The city's interior spaces continue to hold their contents without adjustment, light, air, and sound remaining distributed across surfaces and volumes. Nothing draws away from this arrangement, and nothing presses toward change, the alignment sustained through ordinary presence, through the way materials rest against one another and remain. A low breeze moves along the ground where stone meets dust, lifting fine particles that settle again without forming patterns that last. The air carries slight variations in temperature, cooler near shaded recesses, warmer where walls face open sky. These differences felt gradually as one moves rather than noticed all at once. A hand brushes against a doorway edge, leaving no mark, the contact brief and unremarkable, the surface continuing to hold its smoothness. In a covered walkway, beams overhead cast long, narrow bands of shadow that lie across the floor, their edges softened by the angle of the light sources placed nearby. The floor shows faint discolorations where water has spilled and dried repeatedly, the stone darkened in irregular shapes that do not spread further. Footfalls pass through, measured and light, the sound contained within the corridor and absorbed by the surrounding mass. A small courtyard opens off this passage, enclosed on three sides, the fourth facing inward toward another set of rooms. At its center, a shallow depression holds a basin fed by a narrow channel, water entering with barely audible movement. The basin's rim is worn smooth, its curve familiar to the touch. Reflections within it shift slowly as air passes overhead, never holding a single image for long. Nearby, a cluster of plants grows in carefully maintained soil, leaves arranged to catch available light without crowding one another. The soil remains dark and cool, pressed firm around the stems. Moisture clings to the lower leaves, forming small beads that drop occasionally, absorbed immediately by the ground. The scent here is faint and earthy, blending with the surrounding stone. In an adjacent room, shelves carved into the wall hold rolled textiles, each secured with a simple tie. The fabric shows slight variations in color and weave, evidence of different hands and materials, yet all rest evenly, their weight distributed so the shelves do not bow. A finger lifts one roll slightly, then sets it back, the motion leaving the arrangement unchanged. Beyond, an open stair leads upward, its steps shallow and wide, encouraging a steady pace. The stone here feels cooler, the surface less worn, catching light in a softer way. At the top, a flat area opens beneath the sky, bordered by low walls that offer a place to sit or rest objects temporarily. From here, the spread of roofs and courtyards appears layered rather than distant, each plane holding its own pockets of shadow and warmth. Sounds from below reach this height muted and indistinct, blending into a low, continuous presence. A piece of cloth laid over the wall edge stirs slightly, responding to air currents that shift direction without pattern. The cloth's weave is visible where the light touches it, threads crossing and recrossing in regular intervals. At ground level again, narrow channels carry water away from shared spaces, their paths defined by shallow grooves that guide the flow without haste. The water moves evenly, collecting small particles and carrying them a short distance before releasing them where the ground dips. The channels remain clear through simple attention, stones adjusted occasionally to maintain their shape. Within rooms set aside for record-keeping, lamps burn low, their flames steady. Shadows cast by shells and stacked materials remain consistent, overlapping without confusion. A scribe's tools lie arranged near the edge of a table, reed pens aligned, ink contained, nothing displaced. The air holds the faint smell of soot and prepared ink, neither strong nor absent. Throughout these spaces, the arrangement of objects and people continues to hold, light and air circulating through openings sized and placed to allow movement without draft. The surfaces, sounds, and temperatures maintain their balance, each element resting in relation to the others, continuing without interruption. Through the steady placement of walls and openings that allow movement to remain gentle. In a shaded interior where light reaches only indirectly, a stone bench holds the cool of the night more fully than the surrounding floor, its surface slightly damp to the touch. The bench sits against a wall marked by faint discolorations where moisture has risen and fallen in narrow bands, leaving behind subtle variations in tone. A vessel rests nearby, its rounded base settled into a shallow ring worn into the stone, ensuring it does not shift when set down or lifted. A narrow window opening admits a sliver of air that moves along the room's length, brushing across stored objects before slipping out again. The movement stirs nothing loose, only altering the feel of the space for a moment as the temperature adjusts by small degrees. On a low shelf, stacked tablets lie flat, their edges aligned carefully, corners smoothed by handling. A thin layer of dust coats them evenly, disturbed only where fingers have recently passed, leaving faint arcs that do not extend far. Outside this room, the ground slopes gently toward a shared open space where the surface transitions from stone to packed earth. The earth holds warmth differently, releasing it more quickly, so the air above it feels lighter, less contained. Footprints overlap here, some sharper, others blurred, the ground recording presence without maintaining clear distinction. A shallow groove marks where water has flowed during cleaning, its path meandering slightly before fading into the surrounding texture. Along one side, a wall supports a series of niches, each holding small objects placed without display. A bowl, a folded cloth, a bundle of reeds tied together. The niches vary in depth, catching light unevenly, so some objects are outlined clearly, while others remain partly in shadow. The wall itself shows fine cracks that do not widen, lines that have settled into the surface and remain stable. Touching them reveals no looseness, only the firmness of material held in balance. Nearby, a covered area shelters tools arranged against a post, their handles leaning together at slight angles. Wood grain is visible along each handle, smoothed where palms have gripped repeatedly. The metal portions show dull surfaces, edges maintained through use rather than polish. A faint smell of worked material lingers, blending with earth and stone so it does not stand apart. No sound comes from this arrangement unless disturbed, and it remains undisturbed. Further along, a passage opens toward another courtyard where the floor is paved with smaller stones set closely together. The joints between them hold fine grit that cushions steps and softens sound. A lamp mounted at shoulder height casts light downward, creating a gentle gradient that fades toward the edges. Insects move briefly through the illuminated area, then vanish into darker corners without trace. In this courtyard, a low wall encloses a planted area where soil is mounded carefully around the bases of young trees. Their trunks are slender, bark smooth, leaves sparse but firm. Water reaches them through a narrow spout that delivers a controlled flow, enough to dampen the soil without pooling. The sound of this water is barely audible, a soft contact rather than a stream. The soil absorbs it readily, darkening slightly before returning to its usual tone. Across from the plants, a doorway leads into a long room where mats are laid side by side, edges touching. The mats show patterns from weaving that catch light differently as one moves past, creating subtle shifts in appearance. The air here is warmer, held by the closeness of walls and ceiling. Breathing is steady, unremarkable, the sound blending into the room's overall quiet. From this point, paths branch without emphasis, each continuing into spaces shaped by the same careful attention to proportion and use. The distribution of light, the movement of air, and the placement of objects remain consistent, allowing each area to hold its particular combination of textures and temperatures. Nothing presses toward change or pause, and the arrangement continues to support itself through ordinary presence, sustained by the way materials, water, and movement remain in relation, with the quiet reliability of forms meeting their intended use. In a narrow alcove formed by the meeting of two walls, a clay jar rests partially recessed, its shoulder touching stone, its base cushioned by a ring of woven fiber. The jar's surface bears faint ridges from shaping, each catching light differently, creating a soft variation that becomes visible only when one stands close. A thin film of coolness covers it, the result of water held within, and when a palm lingers there, the sensation remains localized, not spreading beyond the point of contact. A few steps away, a low doorway opens into a working space where the ceiling slopes downward, encouraging a slight bend of the neck. The floor here shows a different wear pattern, smoothed in a circular area where people have stood repeatedly, turning in place rather than passing through. Against one wall, a wooden frame supports stretched fibers, their tension even, their alignment checked by touch rather than sight. The fibers emit a faint, dry sound when brushed, then settle again, unchanged in position. Light reaches this space indirectly, reflecting off a pale surface outside and entering softened, without sharp edges. Dust motes drift briefly through the illuminated portion, visible only where the light catches them, then disappearing into the surrounding dimness. The air feels denser here, held by the closeness of walls and the low ceiling, but it remains fresh, moving slowly through small openings placed to allow circulation without draft. Beyond this room, a passage widens gradually, the walls pulling back just enough to change the way sound behaves. Footsteps become slightly more audible, then soften again as the floor material changes underfoot. The transition is felt as a difference in texture. The stone here laid in larger sections, their seams narrower, the surface cooler. A shallow indentation near one edge holds a trace of moisture, reflecting a sliver of light that shifts as one passes. An open doorway leads into a space used for preparation, where surfaces are kept clear between uses. A long stone slab occupies the center, its top smooth and level, edges worn into gentle curves. Along its sides, faint marks indicate repeated contact, hands placed, objects set down and lifted. Nearby, containers of varied sizes are arranged close to the wall, their lids resting atop them rather than sealed. allowing easy access without disturbance. The smell in this area is neutral, composed of stone, water, and the faint residue of materials handled earlier. It does not cling or announce itself, existing only as part of the overall atmosphere. A shallow bowl sits near the slab, its interior showing a thin line where liquid has evaporated previously, leaving a pale trace that remains until the next use. The bowl does not move, and the trace remains visible. Outside, a narrow strip of open ground separates buildings, allowing air and light to pass between them. The ground here is uneven, small depressions forming where water has pooled and dried repeatedly. These depressions collect fine sediment, darker than the surrounding earth, creating a subtle pattern that changes only when disturbed. A small plant grows at the edge of one such depression, its leaves close to the ground, edges firm. A wall bordering this strip shows a difference in surface texture near its base, where contact with moisture has smoothed the stone more than above. The transition between textures is gradual, not abrupt, visible only upon close inspection. A hand placed there feels the difference immediately, the lower portion cooler and slightly slick, the upper drier and rougher. Both remain solid, supporting their own weight without strain. Further along, a covered walkway runs parallel to this open strip, its roof supported by evenly spaced posts. The posts cast shadows that fall across the walkway floor at regular intervals, creating a pattern that guides movement naturally along the center. The floor itself is swept clean, its surface showing fine scratches aligned in multiple directions, evidence of repeated maintenance. The air here moves more freely, passing along the length of the walkway and out through openings at either end. Within adjacent rooms, quiet activity continues without emphasis. Objects are moved short distances, adjusted slightly, then left. The sounds produced are brief and contained, absorbed by surrounding materials. Light remains steady, neither brightening nor dimming noticeably, and the arrangement of space continues to hold its form, supporting these small, ordinary actions without drawing attention to them. The continuity held through the ordinary spacing of walls and the way air settles between them. In a room set slightly lower than the surrounding floor, coolness gathers near the ground, noticeable at the ankles before anywhere else. The stone here shows a faint sheen, not from polish but from repeated contact with moisture carried in on feet and vessels, the surface neither slick nor dry. Along one side, a narrow ledge runs the length of the wall, its edge softened where objects have been slid back and forth without force. A small opening near the ceiling admits a steady exchange of air, the current slow enough that it can be felt only when standing directly beneath it. Dust collects on the ledge in a thin, even layer, disturbed in places by recent use, leaving partial arcs and lines that do not form a pattern. A bundle of reeds leans against the wall below, bound loosely, their ends uneven, tips brushing the stone with a faint fibrous sound when touched. Adjacent to this space, a broader room opens with a ceiling supported by a single central column. The column's base is thicker than its upper portion, flaring gently where it meets the floor, the stone showing concentric wear marks from years of passing contact. Light falls around it unevenly, creating a subtle shift in brightness as one moves in a slow circle. The floor around the base is smooth, the stone compressed and burnished by countless steps. Against the far wall, shallow shells hold vessels arranged by size rather than type, their rims aligned, their bodies resting close without touching. The clay varies slightly in tone, from pale to deeper earth colors, each surface matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. A faint clink sounds when one vessel is adjusted, then stops immediately, the arrangement returning to stillness. The air carries a muted mineral scent, the combined presence of stone, clay, and water. From this room, a narrower corridor extends, its walls closer, the ceiling lower, creating a sense of enclosure without confinement. The floor slopes gently upward, enough to be felt in the calves but not enough to alter pace. Along one wall, a series of shallow grooves marks where hands have brushed repeatedly, the stone there smoother, slightly warmer from frequent contact. The corridor turns once, not sharply, guiding movement rather than redirecting it. At the corridor's end, an open space receives more air, the temperature adjusting subtly as the ceiling height increases. Here, a group of low platforms stands arranged in a loose pattern, each surface showing marks from use that overlap without erasing one another. The platforms are close enough to share light and air, yet spaced so that movement between them remains easy. The ground beneath them is swept clear, fine dust pushed to the edges where it gathers in soft lines. A vessel placed on one platform contains water drawn recently, its surface still, reflecting the underside of a roof beam above. The beam's wood grain is visible in the reflection, reversed and slightly distorted by the water's curvature. A drop falls from the vessel's rim, landing on the platform with a muted sound, spreading briefly before soaking in. The mark darkens the stone, then holds, neither growing nor fading quickly. Nearby, a folded cloth rests at the edge of another platform, its layers uneven, corners tucked in loosely. The cloth's fibers catch light at different angles, revealing subtle variations in weave. When air moves through the space, the cloth shifts almost imperceptibly, edges lifting and settling without changing its position. The movement adds no sound beyond a faint brushing that blends into the surrounding quiet. Beyond this area, an open passage leads back toward the riverward side, the floor gradually transitioning from stone to compacted earth. The change is felt underfoot as a slight give, the ground responding gently to weight. The air here carries a cooler note, hinting at proximity to water without revealing it directly. Walls along this passage show fewer marks, their surfaces less worn, suggesting slower, less frequent movement. At intervals, small recesses in the walls hold lamps or containers, their contents steady, their placement consistent. The lamps burn low, flame steady, producing minimal smoke that rises and disperses before collecting. Soot marks above them remain faint, cleaned regularly enough to prevent buildup. The light they cast does not reach far, illuminating only what is immediately near. Throughout these connected spaces, the relationship between surfaces, air, and movement remains constant. Objects stay where they are placed until needed again, and when moved, they return to rest without disturbance. The arrangement continues to support itself through these small, continuous adjustments, maintaining its balance through presence rather than effort. In a sheltered corner near the passage, a stack of flat stones rests against a wall, each piece chosen for its thickness and shape, edges chipped just enough to interlock when needed. The stones carry a faint chalky residue that transfers lightly to the fingers, leaving a pale trace that fades quickly when brushed against cloth. The wall behind them shows no indentation from their weight, the pressure distributed evenly across the surface, maintaining its straight line. The passage opens onto a broader area where the ceiling lifts and the air spreads, losing the slight compression felt earlier. Here, the sound of movement disperses more widely, footsteps registering briefly before dissolving into the open volume. A beam runs across the ceiling, its underside darkened slightly from age, the wood fibers compressed where it meets the stone supports. The join between materials remains firm, the alignment unchanged. On one side, a long bench carved directly from stone follows the curve of the wall, its surface gently sloped to shed dust and moisture. The bench holds a faint warmth, absorbed earlier and released slowly, detectable only after lingering contact. Small variations in the stone's surface create a subtle texture beneath the hand, shallow depressions and ridges that do not form a pattern. No markings indicate ownership or designation. The bench remains simply available. Above it, the wall surface bears traces of lime wash applied repeatedly, layers thin enough that the stone's grain remains visible. In places, the wash has worn away, revealing darker patches beneath, creating a soft contrast that does not draw focus. Light from a nearby opening falls across these areas at a shallow angle, emphasizing texture without sharpness. As the light shifts slightly, the emphasis changes, though the wall itself does not. The opening leads to a narrow exterior space where air circulates more freely, carrying with it the faint scent of water and vegetation. The ground here is a mix of packed earth and scattered stone fragments, each fragment settled firmly, edges dulled by exposure. A thin channel runs along one side, guiding water away from the wall, its path defined by small stones placed carefully to maintain direction. The water within moves quietly, barely disturbing the surface. Along the outer wall, a series of hooks embedded in the stone hold lengths of rope coiled loosely. The ropes vary in thickness, fibers rough and worn smooth in alternating sections. When touched, they yield slightly, retaining the shape of the hand before relaxing back into their coils. The hooks show no rust or residue. Their surface is clean, edges rounded where rope has slid repeatedly. A short distance away, a wooden door stands ajar, its panels thick, grain running vertically. The door's surface shows shallow scratches, none deep enough to weaken it, evidence of regular use rather than force. The hinge moves quietly when the door shifts, the sound contained and brief. Light spills through the opening, illuminating the threshold where stone has been worn into a shallow curve by passing feet. Inside, the floor drops slightly, creating a sense of enclosure as the ceiling lowers again. The air feels stiller here, holding a consistent temperature that contrasts gently with the space outside. Along the walls, storage jars are set into shallow recesses, their bases cradled securely. The jars' mouths are covered with fitted lids of cloth and clay, sealed enough to protect contents while allowing easy access. The jars emit faint, distinct scents depending on what they hold, but none dominate. These scents layer together into a muted presence that remains close to the surfaces rather than filling the room. The floor beneath them is clean, swept regularly, fine dust gathered toward the center and removed. No footprints linger long enough to be noted. In the center of the room, a low table supports a shallow tray filled with small, sorted items, arranged by size and shape. Each item rests in its place without touching the others, spacing maintained through habit rather than measurement. A hand hovers briefly above the tray, selects one piece, then returns it to the same spot, the arrangement preserved. The motion produces no sound beyond a soft contact. Beyond this room, another opening leads back into the network of passages, their alignments guiding movement gently without directing it. The sequence of spaces continues to offer variations in enclosure and openness, warmth and coolness, light and shadow, all held within a stable range. Materials remain responsive without shifting position, and the environment continues to support itself through these subtle, ongoing interactions, sustained without interruption. Sustained without interruption by the way each surface holds its role. In a narrow recess beside the returning passage, a stone basin sits at floor level, its interior smoothed by repeated filling and emptying. The basin contains a shallow pool of water, cool and clear, its surface broken only by the faint vibration of air passing overhead. Along the inner curve, mineral traces mark previous levels, thin lines that follow the basin's shape without forming a strict pattern. When a hand dips briefly, the water responds with a small movement that settles almost immediately. The passage floor here shows a subtle gradient, slightly higher along the center, encouraging water to move toward the edges where it can be collected or guided away. The stone bears fine scratches oriented in different directions, the result of routine cleaning rather than wear from traffic. The air feels balanced, neither dry nor damp, carrying a faint coolness that clings near the floor before lifting gradually toward the ceiling. Light enters from an opening above and behind, softened by distance and angle, leaving no harsh contrasts. At one turn in the passage, the wall thickens, creating a shallow alcove where a small stool rests. The stool's legs are uneven in thickness, shaped to fit the stone surface beneath so that it remains stable without adjustment. Its seat shows a slight depression where weight has settled over time, the wood fibers compressed and darkened. The stool remains where it is, not tucked away, its presence accepted as part of the space rather than an object to be noticed. Beyond the alcove, the passage widens again, allowing two people to pass without altering pace. The walls here display a different texture, the stone blocks fitted with tighter joints, their faces more evenly worked. Running a hand along them reveals a consistent coolness, the surface firm and unyielding. Occasional patches of lighter stone appear where repairs were made long ago, blended carefully so they do not interrupt the overall continuity. An opening to the side reveals a room used for sorting and preparation, its floor covered with a layer of fine sand spread evenly to protect the stone beneath. The sand bears shallow impressions from recent activity, not deep enough to track direction, only indicating presence. Low tables stand along the perimeter, their surfaces clear except for a few neatly arranged items awaiting use. The air here carries a faint dryness, the sand absorbing moisture and scent alike. In one corner, a shallow basket holds fragments of stone and ceramic set aside for reuse. The fragments vary in size and shape, edges smoothed where they have rubbed against one another. The basket's weave shows slight gaps where fibers have relaxed, allowing glimpses of the contents without spilling. When touched, the basket responds with a soft creak, then stills, maintaining its form. Across the room, a narrow opening leads into a storage space where the ceiling lowers and the air cools noticeably. The temperature change is gradual, felt as a gentle shift rather than a boundary. Inside, rows of jars stand aligned along the walls, each separated by a small space to allow air circulation. The jar's surfaces feel cool and slightly rough, the clay absorbing and releasing moisture evenly. Cloth seals cover their mouths, tied securely but without tension. The floor beneath the jars is slightly raised, preventing contact with any moisture that might collect below. A faint slope guides water toward a drain cut discreetly into one corner, its opening protected by a simple stone grate. The drain remains clear, the edges smooth from regular maintenance. No standing water remains long enough to alter the air. Returning to the passage, the sound of movement resumes its low presence, footsteps and fabric brushing stone without echo. The ceiling height adjusts subtly, encouraging posture without imposing it. Light continues to distribute itself across surfaces in a way that reveals texture rather than form, allowing details to appear gradually as one moves. Farther along, an open area appears where the passage meets others at shallow angles, creating a junction without emphasis. The floor here is marked by intersecting wear patterns, lines softened where paths overlap. Above, the ceiling opens to a small vent, allowing warm air to rise and escape. The movement is slow and constant, perceptible only through the slight difference in air near the opening. At the edges of this junction, small niches hold objects placed temporarily: a folded cloth, a shallow bowl, a bundle of cords. These items rest without tension, their placement provisional yet stable. Nothing suggests urgency or completion. The objects remain available, the space holding them without expectation. From this point, the environment continues to unfold through adjacent rooms and passages, each maintaining its particular balance of enclosure, texture, and temperature. The distribution of light and air remains even, guided by openings shaped through familiarity rather than design. Materials continue to meet one another quietly, and the arrangement persists, held together by ordinary contact and use, without pause or need for change. A shallow corridor extends from the junction, its floor laid with long stone slabs whose seams run parallel, guiding the eye forward without drawing it. The slabs vary slightly in height, enough that the foot registers the difference, adjusting pressure automatically. Along the right side, the wall curves inward almost imperceptibly, creating a narrowing that encourages a steady, centered path. The stone here carries a cooler tone, the surface faintly pitted, holding small pockets of shadow that shift as light passes across them. At intervals along this corridor, small openings appear near the ceiling, admitting narrow ribbons of air that descend slowly before dispersing. These currents create slight variations in temperature, noticeable only when standing still long enough for the skin to register the change. Dust suspended briefly in these currents settles again onto ledges and into seams, forming soft accumulations that are later brushed away in unhurried motions. The air remains clear, carrying no sharp scent, only the combined presence of stone and night-cooled surfaces. The corridor opens into a rectangular room, where the ceiling height increases gradually rather than abruptly. The transition is felt as a release of pressure, the breath deepening slightly without conscious adjustment. The floor here is marked by a central area of wear, an oval where movement has concentrated over time. Surrounding this area, the stone remains less polished, its texture more pronounced, catching light in a diffuse manner. Along one wall, a series of low cabinets built into the stone hold shallow trays stacked carefully. Each tray is carved from wood, edges rounded, surfaces bearing faint marks from repeated use. When a tray is lifted, it produces a soft, brief sound, wood contacting stone, Then silence returns. The trays are returned to their places without alignment checks, fitting naturally into the space provided. Opposite the cabinets, a wide opening leads into an open-air courtyard, partially enclosed by high walls. The sky above appears as a broad, quiet plain, its light diffused and even. The courtyard floor is composed of tightly set stones arranged in a pattern that subtly directs water toward a central drain. The drain itself is covered by a lattice of stone strips, wide enough to allow flow, narrow enough to prevent debris from entering. The stones around it are darker, retaining moisture longer than the surrounding surface. In one corner of the courtyard, a shallow trough receives water from a narrow spout. The flow is steady but minimal, creating a soft, continuous sound that blends with the ambient quiet. The water's surface shows faint ripples that reflect fragments of wall and sky, breaking and reforming without rhythm. The trough's edges are worn smooth, the stone cool beneath the hand. Along the courtyard walls, tall niches hold large jars elevated slightly off the ground on stone rings. The jars' bodies are broad and stable, their shoulders gently sloped. Cloth covers are secured loosely, allowing air exchange without exposing contents. The jars remain motionless, their presence defined by mass and placement rather than ornament. A shaded section of the courtyard offers a gradual shift in temperature, the stone floor cooler where it has not absorbed as much warmth. The transition between light and shade is soft, without sharp boundary, encouraging lingering without pause. A bench set into the wall here holds no markings, its surface smooth and gently sloped. When sat upon, it yields no sound, the stone absorbing movement completely. From the courtyard, another passage leads outward, narrower and lower, directing movement back toward enclosed spaces. The walls here are thicker, the air slightly warmer, held longer by the mass of stone. The floor shows fewer wear marks, suggesting less frequent passage, though it remains clean and even. A faint scent of stored grain drifts from a nearby room, subtle and contained. Inside that room, sacks are stacked carefully against the wall, their bases resting on wooden slats to keep them from direct contact with stone. The sack's surfaces are coarse, fibers visible, seams reinforced where weight gathers. The contents settle evenly, creating a firm but yielding shape. The air is dry, absorbing sound quickly, so movement produces little echo. Near the entrance, a simple scale rests on a low platform, its arms balanced, weights arranged neatly beside it. The metal surfaces are dull, handled often but never polished. The scale remains untouched for now, its balance steady, responding only to the slightest air movement. Returning again to the passage network, the spatial rhythm resumes its familiar alternation of narrow and wide, low and high. Each transition is gradual, encouraging adjustment without notice. Light continues to distribute itself across surfaces, revealing textures and edges without emphasis. The environment remains engaged in its quiet continuity, surfaces meeting air, objects resting where placed, the arrangement sustained through ongoing presence rather than directed effort. A narrow stair descends from the passage, each step shallow and wide, the edges rounded from repeated contact. The stone here holds a consistent coolness, felt through thin soles and bare skin alike, the temperature steady from step to step. Along the inner wall, a low ridge runs parallel to the stairs, placed at a height that catches the fingertips naturally, offering balance without calling for it. The ridge shows a smooth polish where hands have passed, its surface uninterrupted. At the base of the stair, the floor opens into a long room whose length exceeds its width, encouraging movement along its center line. The ceiling is supported by evenly spaced beams, their shadows falling in soft bands across the floor. These shadows remain gentle, their edges blurred by the angle of light entering from small openings set high in the walls. The floor stones vary slightly in color, forming a muted pattern that remains secondary to their texture. Along both sides of the room, low platforms hold tools and materials arranged in loose groupings. The groupings are defined by use rather than shape, objects placed close enough to be reached easily, far enough apart to avoid contact. Wooden handles rest against stone, metal edges turned inward to protect both surface and hand. The smell here is faint, a blend of worked materials that does not linger strongly. Between the platforms, a clear path remains open, its surface more worn, the stones smoothed by consistent passage. The wear does not deepen into grooves, it spreads evenly, maintaining the floor's level. When walked upon, the sound produced is minimal, a dull contact absorbed quickly. The air feels slightly warmer here, held by the enclosed length of the room and the presence of stored materials. At one end, a wide opening leads to another enclosed space where the ceiling lowers again. The transition is gradual, the change in height felt more through posture than sight. Inside, shelves line the walls from floor to shoulder height, each shelf holding containers of varying sizes. The containers are arranged with their openings facing outward, allowing contents to be checked without movement. Their surfaces are matte, absorbing light and reducing glare. A shallow trough runs along the base of one wall, catching any moisture that condenses on the stone. The trough remains mostly dry, its presence preventive rather than active. A thin layer of fine grit lines its bottom, evenly distributed, indicating regular attention. The stone above it shows no streaking, the moisture managed before it can spread. Near the center of this space, a low work surface bears faint marks from previous tasks, lines and circles that overlap without forming a clear image. The surface remains level, its edges intact. A small pile of tools rests nearby, arranged loosely, their placement familiar enough that each can be found without searching. When one tool is lifted, another shifts slightly, then settles again. A narrow doorway opens from this room into a quieter area where the floor is covered with tightly woven mats. The mats lie flat, their edges aligned, fibers pressed smooth by use. Walking across them produces almost no sound, the movement absorbed by the weave. The air here feels softer, the mats holding warmth and dampening echoes. Along the walls, cushions are placed at regular intervals, their filling firm, their covers showing subtle variations in stitching. The cushions remain where they are placed, their positions adjusted only slightly over time to maintain even wear. Light enters through a small opening near the ceiling, falling in a narrow column that shifts subtly as air moves. Dust particles drift through this light briefly, then settle into the mats. Beyond, another passage returns toward more open spaces, the ceiling rising gradually, the air cooling by small degrees. The walls here show fewer marks, their surfaces closer to their original finish, though still softened by age. A shallow groove runs along the floor's edge, guiding any stray moisture away from the walking surface. As movement continues through these connected spaces, the qualities of each area remain distinct yet related, defined by proportion, material, and use. Light, air, and sound continue to distribute themselves according to the shapes provided, responding without strain. Objects remain in their places until required, and when handled, they return to rest without altering the balance that holds the environment steady. The floor ahead changes again, the stone giving way to compacted earth mixed with fine gravel, each particle settled firmly so that the surface remains even underfoot. The texture is felt immediately, a slight softness that absorbs pressure and quiets movement further. Along the edges, the earth rises gently to meet the walls, forming a shallow curve that prevents dust from collecting in corners. The color here is deeper, the tones muted, holding light rather than reflecting it. A series of wooden posts supports the ceiling in this area, their bases set into stone collars that keep them from direct contact with the ground. The posts are straight, their surfaces marked with subtle variations in grain and tone, the result of age and exposure rather than treatment. When the air moves, it carries a faint woody scent that blends with earth and stone, remaining close rather than spreading. The posts stand evenly spaced, creating a rhythm that guides movement without enforcing direction. Between the posts, open space allows for the placement of large containers, some resting directly on the ground, others elevated on low platforms. The containers' shapes are simple and functional, wide at the base, narrowing toward the opening. Their surfaces show signs of repeated handling, areas smoothed where hands have lifted or steadied them. Lids rest nearby, positioned so they can be replaced easily. They're fit close but not tight. The air in this space feels slightly cooler, drawn from a shaded opening along one wall that leads to an exterior passage. That opening admits a soft flow that moves across the ground first, then rises gradually, creating a gentle circulation. The sound of this movement is barely perceptible, a change in the way silence settles rather than an audible draft. Dust near the opening shifts slightly, then resettles in a new arrangement that remains until disturbed again. At the far end, a low wall separates this area from another room, the wall topped with a smooth coping stone that shows a continuous wear line along its edge. People lean here briefly, resting weight without lingering, leaving no marks beyond the existing polish. Beyond the wall, the floor rises slightly, returning to stone, the transition marked by a thin strip of harder material set into the ground to prevent erosion. Crossing into this next room, the ceiling height increases, and the sound of movement becomes more open, though still subdued. The walls here are lighter in tone, reflecting more of the available light, which enters through a broad opening near the roof line. The light spreads evenly, revealing the subtle variations in the stone blocks, their faces not perfectly uniform, each carrying its own texture. Along one side, a long table stands supported by thick legs, its surface bearing shallow indentations from repeated tasks. The indentations do not overlap completely. They accumulate side by side, evidence of varied use. A thin layer of fine dust covers the surface, disturbed only in small areas where recent activity has occurred. The dust dulls the surface slightly, softening any glare. Near the table, baskets are arranged in a loose cluster, each holding different materials sorted by feel rather than appearance. One basket contains smooth pebbles, another fibrous plant matter, another fragments of worked stone. The basket's rims are uneven, the weave responding to humidity, expanding and contracting subtly. When touched, they emit a faint sound, then return to stillness. The floor beneath these baskets shows compressed areas where weight has rested repeatedly, the stones slightly darker there. These marks do not deepen, they spread evenly, maintaining the floor's level. A narrow channel runs along the wall to carry away any stray moisture, its presence discreet, the opening protected by a small lip that prevents debris from entering. From this room, a broad opening leads back toward the central network of passages, the transition marked by a change in acoustics rather than appearance. Sounds from adjacent spaces overlap briefly here, then separate again as one moves on. The air adjusts gradually, warmer or cooler by small degrees, the change registered by skin before thought. Throughout these interconnected spaces, the arrangement continues to support itself through ordinary alignment and use. Materials remain where they are placed, responding only to direct contact. Light, air, and sound move according to the forms provided, and the environment holds its balance through these continuous, unremarked interactions, remaining steady without effort. Effort. A long, gently sloping passage draws the ground upward again, the packed earth gradually giving way to larger stone slabs set with deliberate spacing. Each slab meets the next with a narrow seam filled with fine grit that compresses underfoot without shifting. The transition is gradual enough that the body adjusts its balance without notice, weight distributing evenly as the surface firms. Along the sides, the walls broaden slightly, allowing air to move laterally as well as forward, creating a faint sense of openness without exposure. Set into the left wall, a sequence of shallow recesses holds oil lamps extinguished for the moment, their wicks trimmed, bowls clean. The stone within each recess is darkened from prior use, the soot absorbed into the surface rather than layered upon it. Touching the stone leaves no residue, only a slight warmth retained from earlier light. The lamps sit level, their bases aligned to prevent tilt, waiting without demand. The passage opens into a wider chamber where the floor is uninterrupted by furniture or partitions. The stone here is pale, its surface subtly reflective, catching and diffusing light from multiple directions. The ceiling arches gently, not high enough to echo, not low enough to press downward. Sound in this space feels softened, footsteps dispersing outward and upward rather than returning. The air carries a faint coolness that settles evenly across skin and fabric. Along the perimeter of the chamber, low ledges run beneath the walls, providing places to set objects temporarily. A folded cloth rests on one ledge, its edges aligned with the stone, the weave visible where light falls across it. Nearby, a shallow bowl holds a small quantity of grain, kernels resting quietly, their matte surfaces absorbing light. The bowl sits stable, its base fitted to a slight depression worn into the ledge over time. Openings along the far wall lead to adjoining spaces, each opening framed by stone smoothed from passage. The thresholds show subtle wear, the stone slightly lower at the center where feet most often cross. Beyond one opening, the sound of water can be sensed rather than heard, a presence carried through the air without distinct rhythm. The walls here are thicker, their mass moderating temperature so the air feels consistent from space to space. Stepping through another opening reveals a narrow gallery running parallel to an exterior wall. The gallery's floor is laid with long, narrow stones whose surfaces show fine, linear marks from sweeping. Light enters through small apertures set high in the outer wall, each aperture angled to admit light without glare. The resulting illumination forms soft patches that drift slowly across the floor as air moves, edges blurring rather than shifting sharply. Against the inner wall of the gallery, a row of wooden chests sits evenly spaced. Their lids are closed, their surfaces showing shallow impressions where hands have rested. The wood has darkened with age, grain visible beneath a smooth finish worn by touch rather than abrasion. When pressed lightly, the lids do not creak, the joints remain tight, the contents undisturbed. At intervals along the gallery, the floor widens slightly, creating small pauses in the linear movement. In one such widening, a bundle of reeds stands upright in a clay holder, ends trimmed evenly. The reeds give off a faint vegetal scent that remains close, blending with the stone and wood. The holder's rim shows a slight irregularity where clay settled unevenly during shaping, the imperfection stable and familiar. The gallery bends gently, following the contour of the exterior wall, and leads into another interior space where the ceiling lowers and the light softens further. Here, the walls are coated with a thin wash that reflects light diffusely, muting shadows. The floor is cool, the stone holding its temperature evenly across the surface. A narrow mat lies near the wall, fibers flattened, edges secured so they do not curl. In this space, a small table stands alone, its surface clear except for a single object placed at the center. The object rests without ornament, its shape defined by function, its surface unpolished. The table's legs are braced with crosspieces that show slight wear where feet have nudged them repeatedly. The table remains steady, responding to contact without shifting. Air moves through this room in a slow, continuous exchange, entering through one opening and leaving through another, neither current noticeable on its own. The movement carries away warmth and brings in coolness in small increments, maintaining balance. Dust settles gradually along the edges of the floor, gathering where cleaning tools will pass later, the accumulation expected and unremarked. Beyond, the network of spaces continues to interconnect, each area shaped by proportion and material rather than distinction. The surfaces retain their textures, the air maintains its gentle circulation, and objects remain at rest until needed again. The environment continues to hold itself through these quiet alignments, the ordinary presence of stone, wood, earth, and water sustaining the arrangement without pause. The continuity expressed through the way each surface remains receptive without anticipation. A broad stair rises gently from one of the adjoining spaces, its steps wide enough to accept varied movement, their faces worn smooth and slightly concave from long contact. The stone along the stair's centerline is lighter where feet most often pass, while the edges retain a darker tone, cooler and less disturbed. A narrow channel runs alongside the stair, carved shallowly to guide any moisture downward, its edges softened, never sharp. At the top of the stair, the floor levels out into an open hall where the ceiling lifts and the air expands. The shift is subtle but perceptible. the breath adjusting to the increased volume without effort. Columns stand at measured intervals, their shafts plain, their capitals unadorned, supporting the roof with quiet assurance. The bases of the columns show faint rings of wear where people have leaned or brushed past, the stone there slightly darker, the surface smoother. Light enters this hall from multiple directions, filtered through openings placed high and low, creating an even distribution that avoids strong contrast. The floor reflects this light softly, revealing the fine grain of the stone without glare. Shadows gather gently beneath benches set along the walls, their edges indistinct, blending into the surrounding tones. The benches are carved from the same stone as the floor, their surfaces continuous, edges rounded. Along one side of the hall, a long, low table runs parallel to the wall, its surface clear except for a few objects placed at measured distances. A shallow tray holds smooth stones sorted by size, each stone resting with space around it. Nearby, a bundle of thin wooden rods lies aligned, ends flush, their surfaces showing slight variations in color and grain. The table's surface bears faint marks from repeated placement and removal, lines and shapes overlapping without obscuring one another. At the far end of the hall, a wide opening leads into an exterior-facing space where the air carries a trace of night-cooled moisture. The transition is marked by a slight drop in temperature and a change in sound, the open air absorbing noise more readily. The floor here is laid with stone that feels cooler underfoot, its surface textured to provide secure footing even when damp. This exterior space is partially enclosed by high walls that block wind without sealing the area completely. The walls hold warmth unevenly, creating subtle gradients felt when moving from one side to another. A low parapet runs along the open edge, its top surface worn smooth, offering a place to rest hands or objects briefly. Beyond it, the sky remains present as an expanse of muted light, its influence felt rather than examined. Near the parapet, large jars stand grouped, their rounded forms casting soft shadows that overlap on the stone floor. The jar's surfaces are matte, the clay absorbing moisture from the air and releasing it slowly. Their openings are covered loosely, allowing the contents to breathe without exposure. The jars remain steady, their weight grounded, responding only to direct contact. In a corner sheltered from the open edge, a small hearth sits unused, its stones arranged neatly, ash swept clear. The hearth retains a faint warmth, barely detectable, the residue of earlier use. Nearby, a stack of kindling rests against the wall, pieces sorted by size, ends aligned. The wood emits a dry, faint scent that remains close, blending with stone and air. From this exterior-facing space, a narrow passage returns inward, the walls closing gently, the ceiling lowering again. The air shifts accordingly, becoming more contained, the temperature evening out. The passage floor shows a consistent wear pattern, the stones smoothed evenly, the edges intact. A faint echo accompanies footsteps briefly, then fades as the passage absorbs sound. Within this returning passage, small alcoves appear at irregular intervals, each holding objects placed for convenience. A folded cloth, a shallow bowl, a length of cord coiled neatly. The alcoves are shallow, their stone interiors smooth, the objects fitting comfortably without crowding. Light reaches these alcoves indirectly, illuminating contents softly without casting strong shadows. As the passage reconnects with the broader interior network, the familiar balance resumes, spaces opening and narrowing in gentle sequence. The air continues its slow circulation, guided by openings and volumes shaped through use. Surfaces remain responsive, objects remain at rest, and the environment persists in its steady arrangement, sustained by ordinary contact and alignment, continuing without interruption. Without interruption, the surfaces meeting again in familiar proportions. A narrow side room opens off the passage, its entrance low enough to encourage a slight tilt of the head, the stone lintels smooth where countless foreheads have passed beneath without contact. Inside, the floor dips gently toward the center, creating a shallow basin effect that gathers cool air. The temperature difference is subtle, registered first at the feet, then along the calves, the stone here holding its coolness longer than the surrounding areas. Along the walls of this room, shallow shelves are carved directly from the stone, their edges rounded, their depths uneven by small degrees. Each shelf holds items placed without symmetry yet remaining balanced. A small jar with a chipped rim turned outward, a flat stone used as a weight, a folded length of cloth whose creases have softened into curves. The shelves show no strain, their undersides firm, the stone uncracked. Light enters indirectly, reflected from the passage outside, settling into the room without forming sharp edges. A faint sound emerges here, not distinct enough to locate, a resonance carried through stone from adjacent spaces. It remains constant, neither increasing nor diminishing, blending into the room's stillness. Dust lies thinly across the shelves and floor, disturbed only in small patches where hands have reached or feet have shifted. The dust gathers evenly, its presence expected, its removal routine. Returning to the passage, the floor rises again to meet the surrounding level, the transition smooth enough to go unnoticed. The walls here are thicker, their mass-absorbing sound more completely, so footsteps register only as brief contacts. The air feels slightly warmer, held by the enclosed volume, the shift gradual rather than abrupt. A faint mineral scent emerges from the stone itself, subtle and persistent. Ahead, the passage broadens into a room where the ceiling is supported by crossbeams running perpendicular to the direction of movement. The beams' undersides show shallow grooves from past repairs, wood-pressed and rejoined without ornament. The floor beneath them carries a pattern of wear that mirrors the beams' spacing, movement naturally aligning with the structure above. Light filters in from openings set between the beams, each aperture admitting a soft column that diffuses before reaching the floor. Against one wall, a series of low bins hold sorted materials, their contents visible at a glance. Fine sand rests in one bin, its surface level marked only by the faint impression of a tool set down and lifted again. Another bin holds small stone fragments, their edges softened, colors varied but muted. The bins themselves are constructed of wood reinforced with thin metal bands, joints tight, surfaces worn smooth. Near the center of the room, a broad mat lies flat, its weave dense, fibers pressed down from repeated use. The mat absorbs sound and warmth, creating a zone of quiet within the larger space. Stepping onto it produces no audible change, only a slight shift in the way weight is received. The mat's edges are secured so they do not curl, the fibers trimmed regularly to maintain an even outline. Beyond this room, an opening leads into a long corridor aligned with the outer walls of the structure. The corridor's windows are narrow and placed high, allowing light to enter without revealing the exterior fully. The light arrives angled, illuminating dust motes briefly before they settle again. The floor here is cool, the stone less worn, suggesting slower passage, the surface retaining its original texture. At intervals along the corridor, stone benches are set into the walls, their seats slightly sloped. The benches remain unoccupied, their surfaces cool, holding no imprint beyond the long-established smoothness. Beneath each bench, the floor is darker, shielded from light and swept less frequently, dust gathering there in a fine layer. The walls above show faint streaks where moisture once traced downward, now long dry. The corridor curves gently, following the contour of the building, and opens into another shared space where multiple passages converge. The convergence does not form a focal point. Instead, it disperses movement evenly, allowing paths to cross without congestion. The floor here shows intersecting wear patterns, none dominant, each softened by time. The air moves freely, currents blending and separating without creating draft. In this space, a shallow basin is set into the floor, its rim flush with the surrounding stone. The basin holds a thin layer of water that reflects the ceiling above, the image wavering slightly as air moves. The water remains clear, replenished regularly, its presence functional and calm. A small channel leads away from the basin, guiding overflow discreetly toward a drain beyond sight. The walls surrounding this space carry a lighter wash, reflecting light more evenly, reducing shadow. The wash shows subtle variations where it has thinned, revealing stone beneath. These variations create a gentle texture that shifts with the light's angle, never settling into a fixed appearance. Touching the wall reveals a cool, dry surface, firm and consistent. From here, the network of rooms and passages continues outward and inward, each space shaped by use rather than declaration. The arrangement remains stable, held together by proportion, material, and habit. Light continues to move across surfaces, air circulates through openings, and objects rest where they are placed, the environment sustaining its quiet continuity without pause or need for conclusion. A narrow opening off to one side allows a different quality of air to enter, cooler and carrying a faint trace of moisture that settles on exposed skin without forming droplets. The stone around this opening is darker, its surface polished by repeated contact, edges softened into gentle curves. Beyond it, a covered exterior space stretches along the building's perimeter, its roof supported by columns set at regular intervals, each column slightly varied in thickness, their bases firm and unadorned. The floor here is composed of large stone slabs fitted closely together, seams visible but shallow. The slabs hold warmth unevenly, creating subtle gradients beneath bare feet. Small grains of sand collect along the seams, shifting when stepped on, then resettling in new configurations that remain until disturbed again. Light enters from the open side, diffused by the roof above, casting broad, pale bands that slide slowly across the floor without drawing attention to themselves. Between the columns, low walls rise to waist height, offering a boundary without enclosing the space. These walls carry shallow niches where small objects rest, a coil of rope, a wooden tool with a worn handle, a shallow bowl left inverted. The niches are spaced irregularly, their placement guided by use rather than symmetry. Touching the wall reveals a slight warmth where sunlight has lingered, cooler where shadow persists. Beyond the low walls, the ground slopes gently away, packed earth marked by narrow paths that curve without sharp turns. The earth is firm, its surface textured by footprints that overlap and soften, no single track remaining distinct for long. Sparse vegetation grows here, leaves coated lightly with dust, stems flexible, bending when brushed past and returning to their original positions without sound. A nearby structure opens directly onto this space, its doorway wide and unframed. Inside, the air feels heavier, carrying the scent of stored materials. Stacks of baskets line the walls, their woven fibers darkened by handling. Each basket is filled according to its purpose, contents hidden beneath folded cloth covers that lie flat, corners weighted to prevent shifting. The baskets are arranged to allow clear passage between them, the spacing consistent. In the center of this room, a low table stands on short legs, its surface marked by faint scratches that catch the light at certain angles. Objects placed on the table remain where they are set, their arrangement practical rather than deliberate. A shallow dish holds a small amount of water, its surface still, reflecting the ceiling beams above. The water is replaced as needed, the dish cleaned without ceremony. From this room, another passage leads deeper inward, narrower than those before, walls closer together. The ceiling lowers slightly, encouraging a slower pace. The stone here shows a different texture, rougher, the tool marks visible and left unpolished. Running a hand along the wall produces a faint rasping sound, quickly absorbed by the surrounding mass. This passage opens into a space where the ceiling rises again, allowing air to circulate more freely. Openings near the top of the walls admit light that falls from above, illuminating the center while leaving the edges in soft shadow. The floor bears a pattern of fine cracks, stable and unmoving, their paths irregular and shallow. Dust settles into these cracks, outlining them without spreading further. Along one wall, a long bench runs uninterrupted, its surface cool and smooth. The bench supports occasional use, its presence unobtrusive. Beneath it, the floor is swept clean, the area kept clear. The wall above the bench carries faint marks where objects have leaned briefly, then been removed, leaving no lasting impression. Adjacent to this space, a smaller room holds tools arranged on pegs driven into the stone. The pegs vary in length, some bearing more wear than others. Tools hang quietly, their weight balanced, metal edges dulled through maintenance. The air here smells faintly of oil and stone, a combination familiar and unremarkable. Light in this room is limited, entering through a narrow opening that admits a thin beam. The beam shifts slightly, tracing a path across the wall and floor without marking time. As it moves, it reveals textures otherwise unnoticed. The grain of wood handles, the uneven surface of the stone, the fine dust suspended briefly before settling again. Returning through interconnected spaces, the arrangement remains coherent, each area supporting the others without drawing focus. Movement through them does not accumulate momentum or pause. It flows evenly, guided by the spaces themselves. The sounds, temperatures, and surfaces continue to align, maintaining the environment's steady presence without signaling any change or endpoint. A broader threshold opens onto a space where the ceiling is higher and the air disperses more fully, allowing subtle shifts in temperature to blend without forming pockets. The stone here carries a lighter tone, its surface reflecting more light upward, softening the shadows beneath the roof supports. The supports themselves rise straight and unadorned, their alignment precise enough to guide movement without directing it. The floor between them remains level, its surface showing faint polishing where many paths overlap. Along one side, shallow recesses hold vessels set directly into the wall. Their base is flush with the stone so they cannot be tipped easily. Each vessel contains a different substance, discernible by texture rather than color. Fine grain that settles flat, small rounded pieces that shift softly when disturbed, thicker material that holds shape. Lids rest nearby, placed where they can be reached without searching, their undersides marked by repeated contact. The air here carries a blended scent, muted and stable. Light enters through a sequence of openings set high along the outer wall, each opening angled slightly differently. The light spreads unevenly across the interior, forming overlapping zones of brightness that change subtly as air currents alter the flame positions in nearby lamps. The lamps themselves are set into niches, their flames low and steady, producing warmth without glare. Soot marks above the niches remain faint, cleaned regularly to prevent build-up. A narrow channel runs along the base of one wall, guiding water toward a drain concealed beneath a stone cover. The channel's edges are rounded, its depth consistent, allowing water to move without sound unless disturbed. Occasionally a drop falls from above, striking the channel and merging into the flow, leaving no trace. The stone around the channel feels cooler to the touch, moisture absorbed gradually. Beyond this space, a doorway framed with thicker stone leads into an area where the floor transitions to packed earth. The change in texture is immediate underfoot, firmness yielding slightly, then holding. The earth is kept level, tamped down through regular use, its surface marked with shallow impressions that do not deepen. The air here feels heavier, carrying the scent of stored grain and dried plant matter. Large containers line the walls, their shapes varied, some tall and narrow, others broad and low. Each container is sealed with a fitted cover, edges smoothed to ensure a close fit. The covers bear faint markings scratched lightly into their surfaces, indicating contents through form rather than text. The containers remain still, their mass anchoring the room's quiet. In the center, a low platform raises slightly above the earth floor, constructed of tightly fitted planks. The planks show wear along their edges, corners rounded, surfaces smoothed. The platform remains clear, used as needed, its emptiness as functional as its presence. Light reaches it indirectly, illuminating the grain of the wood without casting sharp shadows. From here, a side opening leads into a narrow exterior passage bounded by high walls. The passage is open to the sky above, allowing a strip of light to fall directly onto the ground. The walls retain warmth, releasing it slowly, creating a stable temperature within the passage. The ground is paved with irregular stones set close together, their surfaces varied, some rougher, some polished smooth. Small openings in the walls connect this passage to interior spaces, each opening fitted with a simple shutter that rests open. Air moves freely through these openings, carrying sounds that blend into the background without standing out. The sounds are soft, distant movement, water flowing somewhere beyond, fabric brushing stone. none of them dominate. At one point, the passage widens slightly, creating a place where objects are set down temporarily. A basket rests here, its contents covered, handle turned inward. A stone weight lies beside it, preventing shifting. The stones underfoot here show deeper wear, evidence of repeated pauses, though no marks remain distinct. Continuing through interconnected spaces, the arrangement remains consistent in its variety. Materials change, light shifts, air circulates, and surfaces respond to touch in predictable ways. Nothing draws attention beyond its immediate presence. The environment holds its balance, each element maintaining its place, extending outward and inward without interruption or need to resolve.